Hello everybody, this is Zero Day, and this is the lambda privilege scenario in the Cloudgoat series. You start off as the Chris user who can perform IAM get and IAM list on all resources, but Chris also has the permission to assume a role. And when you list the roles, you see that there is one role called lambaManager that you could actually assume. And once you get the credentials for this lambda role, you find out that this lambda role can perform any lambda command on any resource. But more importantly, you have the IAM PassRole permission that was given to this lambdaManager role. And using this permission, you can use a higher privileged role that has AdministratorAccess. It was a lambda debug role. And you use this role to pass the AdministratorAccess role to a function that you create. Now this function could have any sort of arbitrary script that you want. The one that we did in this video was the IAM attach policy command, which gave the AdministratorAccess policy to the Chris user. We start off as the Chris user, so let's just put that profile in. Profile Chris, and we can copy paste. And let's begin by enumerating the permissions of Chris. So we can look at the managed and inline policies associated with this user. So you can do that with the IAM list-attached-policies. User policies. Profile Chris, and we need to provide a username. So let's just do that really quick. AWS STS get-caller-identity. We put in the profile. And now we can get this user and put that in, username Chris. And this is the managed policy associated with the user. Before looking at this managed policy, let's see if this user has any inline policies. So AWS IAM list-user-policies. This looks at all the inline policies. And again, let's provide the username. And there are no inline policies associated with this user. So let's see what this managed policy entails. So AWS get-policy, profile Chris, and we need to provide the policy ARN. Policy-ARN, which is up here. And just gives us a little more information. We see that this policy is only attached to one identity, which is our Chris user, and it's running the V1 version, the default version. So let's get this version. So version ID V1 and get policy-version. And these are the permissions associated with this managed policy. We can perform IAM list and IAM get on all resources, but on top of that, we can also perform assume role on all resources. So let's look at what kind of roles there are in this cloud environment. We could do that with the AWS IAM list-roles command. And these are all the roles associated with this cloud infrastructure. Here are just a couple of default roles. So let's look at the custom user-made roles. We have a debug role with this ARN, but we cannot assume it because you need to be part of this Lambda service in order to perform this action. We also have another role, the lambdaManager role, with this ARN, and we can perform STS assume role as long as this is our identity. And as we can see, this is our user, Chris Lambda Privesk, with all of this weird characters at the end over here. But this is our user, and therefore we can assume this role. Now, before assuming this role, let's look at the permissions associated with the role that we can assume, but also the role that we cannot assume, as they are both of interest. So let's look at the attached policies, the managed policies associated with both roles, and let's look at the inline policies associated with both roles. So we could look at the managed policies of a role with the list-attach-role-policies command. And we can provide our profile. Let's make sure to also put IAM over there. And we need to provide a role name. So the role name for lambdaManager is this. Could just put that in there. And there is one managed policy associated with this role. Let's look if there are any inline policies associated with this role. So list-role-policies, there's nothing. So let's once again get the policy version, except this time for this ARN. So policy-ARN, profile Chris, and let's also put the IAM right there, and a version ID, V1. We can see that it is okay to assume that the version that's currently running for this role is V1, because we see right here that this is set to true, that the default version for this policy is in fact V1. So this role can perform any Lambda function on any resource, but it could also do IAM PassRole, which is extremely powerful, because what IAM PassRole will allow us to do is to create some sort of function, for example, which we can do with Lambda. We can create some sort of Lambda function and pass any role to this function, including a role that is higher privileged than us. So think of this kind of like a setUID binary, except it's setUID for, let's say, root, for example. So we have we can create a setUID binary for root. It's kind of like the equivalent. And before we do that, let's look to see if there are any. We had one other function or one other role. It was called somewhere up here. The debug role. So let's get this as well. So we want to get AWS IAM list-attach-role-policies and provide our profile and also a role name. And we have one policy associated with this role, and it is the AdministratorAccess policy, which is quite convenient because we can actually use this role to get administrator access. Let's also look to see if there are any inline policies, and there are none. So no inline policies associated with this role, but there is one managed policy. So this is an extremely powerful role, as it has administrator access. So if we could somehow use this role to create a function with the permissions of this role, then we can create any kind of function, including a function that performs an attach role policy command. And therefore we can get attach role, we can get an administrator access role on our Chris user. It might sound a little bit confusing at first, but as we do it, it will make more sense. What we will need to do is create a function, a Lambda function. And before we do that, let's make sure that we assume the role of that user, or of that role that we had permission to assume, which was called lambaManager. I'll just run this command again. It's very important to save the outputs of your commands. So let's again just list roles, profile Chris, and this is our role, and we want to assume it. So AWS STS assume dash role, and we want to provide a role ARN and a role session name. So our role ARN is this, and our role session name is the role name of lambaManager right here. And we can provide our profile. I misspelled it here, role session name. And we get the access key, secret access key, and session token associated with this role. So let's just quickly put that in. Let's configure, let's call it lambdaManager. Let's put the access key, the secret access key, and the session token. So I don't want to open my credentials file because then my other credentials are exposed. So let's just put in the echo command and let's put in the session token. AWS underscore session underscore token equals this. And let's put it into the AWS credentials file. So now when we do the AWS STS gets dash caller dash identity dash profile lambdaManager, we get the manager, and we don't have any kind of errors saying that our session token or our security token is invalid. So now that we have this user, we want to create some function and use this function with the role of administrator. And the role that has that administrator access is that debug role that we saw. So let's create a function. Let's call it attach role exploit .py. So we want to import BOTO3. That's just a software development kit that's integrated with AWS. It allows you to perform all kinds of different actions in an AWS environment. And one of the things that we could do is attach user policy. So we can attach a policy to our Chris user using the attach user policy command. We need to first define a function, and we can call this function any kind of handler. Let's call this please subscribe underscore handler, and we want to give it an event and a context. And we can say client equals BOTO3.client IAM because we want to perform an IAM command, and response equals client.attach underscore user underscore policy. Username equals, and we need our username of the Chris user. So st get caller identity profile Chris. This is our Chris user. So let's put this in. And we also want a role name. So our policy, and the policy that we would like is the administrator access policy. So policy ARN equals, and I don't know the administrator access policy ARN off the top of my head, so we could just do AWS IAM list dash policies profile Chris grep administrator access. There's tons of different policies, so this takes a while, but eventually we get this. Here's the ARN. And that's it. So now we have this Python script, and we can perform our function, which is AWS lambda create dash function. And there's many different parameters that we need to input with this function. And we could do that. We could see all the different parameters with the help command. It'll show us all the necessary parameters that we must input, as well as the optional commands, optional parameters. So the necessary parameters are function name and role, and the optional parameters are all enclosed in brackets. So things such as runtime, handler, code, and zip file, we would like to input our function as a zip file. And yeah, let's get right to it. So we have AWS Lambda create dash function dash name. Let's call it please work. Role. Our role is that debug role that we saw earlier that has the administrator access permission associated with it. So AWS IAM list dash roles and debug. This was the role. We also want to give it a runtime and a handler, so let's make sure to do that. So we have runtime Python 3.8, let's say, 3.9. Let's give it a handler. So our handler was, what was it again? Was it please subscribe? Yeah, please subscribe underscore handler. And our function was called attach role exploit. So we first provide the function name, which is, or the script name, which is attach underscore role underscore exploit, and we give it our handler. So please subscribe underscore handler. And what other things do we need? We need to provide a zip file as well that contains our script. So let's zip and let's call it attach role exploit .zip. So now we have our zip file. So --zip -file and attach underscore role on exploit.zip. And finally, we can provide our profile, which is lambaManager. So this role failed to satisfy the necessary conditions. So what I just did is I plugged in the role session name and I didn't plug in the role ARN. So what we want is the role ARN, which is right here. So let's just put that in. And now we successfully created the function. We have please work, and it's just initiating into the environment. The function is being creating. By now it's probably created. It's quite a small function, and I'm sure the zip file is very small as well. So now what we can do is invoke the function, and we could do that with the lambda module, and let's do help to see all the parameters of invoke. So AWS lambda invoke help. So when we invoke, we must input a function name and an output file. So let's do AWS lambda -- function -name, and our function name was please work. So please work, and out file, which is, let's call it output.txt. Now before we invoke this function, let's see the managed policies associated with Chris before and after this exploit. So if it all works, then we should see that there's a difference between the before and after. So AWS IAM, and we want to get the list - attached user policies of Chris. So profile Chris, and we want to give it the username. Oops, exit. And I gave it the ARN rather than the username. Let's put the username. So this is the only managed policy associated with the Chris user. And let's see what it is after we run this command. We must specify a region. I did not put in lambaManager here. And we see that there was no error here. So let's see, cat output null, which means the script successfully ran. The reason it's null and not anything else because in the script, I didn't tell it to do anything else other than just perform the attach user policy command. So now let's list the managed policies associated with this user, and we can see that this user now also has administrator access. So we successfully ran this function with higher privileges than what we initially had, and therefore we were able to get administrator access by passing the debug role over to this function of please work. So please work now has administrator access privileges, and once we ran that way we got administrator access on our Chris user.